The only worry I have is the one that almost no one talks about, which is what happens if inflation is very strong and growth is very strong, and then people start to talk not just about when the cut comes, but does it come at all? I think that's a conversation that could move things.
Now, in what sense? Talk to us about that narrative, unpack that a little bit more.
So I'm not saying it's by far the most likely outcome here, but that is one which I think we should start thinking about a little bit, which is if you step back and you said growth is strong, inflation is above target, and now we change the narrative and say the economy is reaccelerating and inflation is actually picking up, then the natural thing to start thinking about is rate hikes. Now, again, this is not the likely expectation, but that does change things. So we run a number of multi-asset solutions at Wellington. This will be a challenge for any multi-asset portfolio because you should expect duration to be protective when equities fall. That would not be the case in the situation. So it's the one thing which is very unlikely, but if it does happen, I think not many people are positioned for.
Interesting. I mean, you're not the first person who's actually sat in this studio in the last couple of weeks who's just even entertained the idea of potentially hiking rates as well. So it's an interesting thing to keep tabs on. I mean, bringing it back to this part of the world, I mean, what does it mean for markets out here? And particularly off the back of, it's not the only inflation print that we've been watching. Of course, we've had China out with its CPI this morning as well. Yeah,
and in some ways, this is the interesting thing, is that we're all focused on the Fed, and of course, lots of people will be staying up tonight for the outcome for that. In many ways, it doesn't matter for many countries here in Asia. Japan has its own story. It's about a very different dynamic going on in Japan. China itself has its own story, a very different one. India itself, there's the elections and its own story. So in many cases, this is ground zero for this theme we've been thinking about, which is the idea of divergence, that you've got lots of countries with their own stories, and this idea of just having a single view of where the world is going needs to evolve a little bit. So we're absolutely focused on the outcome of what happens overnight. But again, beyond that, there are other interesting things we need to spend our time on.
Yeah, it's a bit of patchwork investment out here, isn't it? So where should you go? What's looking good right now out here?
So we remain...
What are the other interesting things?
So we remain really excited about Japan. I think Japan has... It's a culmination of a number of years of reforms going back from Abe onwards, percolating through the system. You've got this economic engine that's turning. You're now having companies reward shareholders, focusing more on shareholders. We're having inflation becoming embedded. So the story about Japan is a secular, long-term, multi-period investment opportunity. India, there was some noise about the election. Political processes are always noisy, but the long-term attraction remains. You've got really attractive demographics. You've got an urbanizing population. You've got consumer and corporate balance sheets in a great place. So India itself remains exciting.
Can you separate, before you complete that thought, can you separate corporate performance and growth and earnings from policy?
In India or in general?
In India. And in general as well.
In general, they are linked, but in some ways, so take Japan as an example. Part of what makes Japan just a very attractive investment opportunity is that the government is encouraging the corporate reforms. So they're intricately linked, as you said. They are driving that in many ways, and that's what we're looking out for, is this value realization coming through. In India, the government impetus has largely been around infrastructure and reform on that.
Yeah.
But that generates an excitement that means money flows in. As money flows in, shareholders start to ask for reform. So it's all kind of connected in some way. I think Japan's the clearest case where the government has said we need to get companies much more focused on shareholders, and we're going to encourage that.